So you got an idea of the scope and the length of the ship when you were in the parking lot. As you get closer, you get an idea just how big this thing is. So sailors would come up a gangway or a set of stairs. Like in the movies, they would ask for permission to come aboard, sir. When permission was granted, they would then turn, salute the U.S. flag, step on board, and they're now a crew member on the North Carolina. When we talk about men on board, you're talking about an average age of 19. If you were in your 20s, you were the old man in your department. 17, with parents' permission to enlist in the Navy or Army. A lot of guys who stole their brother's birth certificates got in at age 15, 16, and they could get away with it. So a very young crew of about 2,000 enlisted men, 300 or so officers, 86 Marines on board to guard the ship in port and do other duties, and that's your complement of 2,300 men. This is a projectile that would be fired out of this big gun here, and the two that are forward. There were two different weights of these, depending upon their design and what they were used for. This is a 16-inch AP, that's armor-piercing projectile. This designed to be fired at another ship, pierce the main deck, then explode down below. This weighed 2,700 pounds. This shell goes 20 miles. That is over the curvature of the Earth, beyond the horizon. No matter how high up here you are, you can't see where the shell lands. It's one of the reasons we've got that plane. It would go up in the air, see the shells land, and then could radio back to the ship and say, you're right on target, you need to adjust your aim one way or the other. Now, if you have a number of ships firing at the same target and you've got multiple explosions, how do you know which ship is firing that particular shell? This one had a green stripe on it, indicative that it was a North Carolina shell. Green was our color. Inside the cone was a package of dye, green in color, and when it landed and exploded, boom, the green dispersed. Other ships had other colors, and these guys would go, green, North Carolina.
North Carolina, you need to adjust your shooting.
Adjust your firing solution. So a real clever solution to a problem, a real problem, without the benefit of today's technology. This was top of the line. This was your showboat. I will mention that the deck that you're walking on, yes, it's a metal ship, but they put a teak deck down. This is the second deck the ship ever had. It was replaced in 2000 or 2001. Teak is really good for a maritime application. It doesn't expand or contract. It has its integrity. If this were hit by a armor-piercing projectile like that one, rather than break into shards of wood, 2.5, 3 feet long, jagged edges that are flying all over the deck and injuring sailors, this is almost a sawdust kind of consistency when it explodes. These are 20 millimeter anti-aircraft guns. Short-range guns, about a mile is maximum effectiveness. These would not be fired unless the enemy was closer than that bridge. Thus the name, pop, 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 door knockers, because you're down below, you're hearing these things, and you know someone is knocking on our door. Every fourth round was a tracer for most of these guns. So there was a crew of 4 here. A canvas bag collected the spent shells. There are 60 in this magazine. In an engagement, you're going to go through 60 just like that. So there was a number of crew members who were bringing these forward from storage, clamping them on so they could continue to fight. We had a band on board. 20-piece military band. That was their rating. I'm musician second class. And they played just about every day. They came out on the fantail, entertained at night if there was going to be a movie. And they'd be playing la-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, the big band hits of the day.
Swing, baby.
Plus all the military songs they would need, National Anthem, Marine Corps Hymn. They would perform at burials at sea. They had a number of duties. They were musicians. So here's our Kingfisher plane. That's a turntable on which a catapult sat. This was the anchor at one end for that catapult. And at the other end, we've got a similar anchor. This plane was sat in a cradle on the catapult, similar to this wooden structure here. But it sat there, and then the pilot would rev the engine to full speed. Somebody behind would touch off a powder charge, like a canister of powder, explosive powder. Rev the engine, blow the powder, and this thing would fly off the catapult, which had been turned into the wind at about 30 degrees off the ship, and then would be airborne. And then it would go do its mission, and then land in the water in a slick created by maneuvering the ship. And that's when this crane and this hook would be lowered to bring them back on board. Now, we are told, as we look at the tail, you're going to see a designation, OS2U. It means observation, spotting, second generation. U3 is the factory or manufacturer. We're told that pilots said that stood for old, slow, and too ugly. Yeah, this had about 171 mile an hour speed for cruising. Fighter planes were well above that. And another of their duties was rescue. And there are a couple of famous rescues that the North Carolina performed. The first one, they were dispatched to pick up U.S. airmen who had been shot out of their planes and were now floating in the Pacific in life jackets or life rafts of some sort. They picked up 10 of these guys. At this point, the plane was running out of fuel. It's not aerodynamic in any way, shape, or form with all this weight distributed this way, so they couldn't take off and rescue them that way. They instead went out to sea, taxied out farther to where a U.S. submarine, the Tang, was also on rescue duty. It came up to the surface. They offloaded all the personnel onto the Tang, and then, presumably when the pilot was not watching, they turned their guns on the ship, well, the plane rather, and sank it to the bottom of the sea so the Japanese wouldn't get control of the Kingfisher plane. But 10 pilots rescued there. Pilot received the Navy Cross. They would show movies out here at night when they were in an area that there was no conflict taking place. Put a big screen up here, projector up there. The band would perform until nightfall. They loved to watch films. So these are intake and outflow vents to bring outside air in. It was hotter than blazes because you're out in the middle of the Pacific at low latitude. So it was very hot and uncomfortable down below. Shells were placed into the magazine down below or on the main deck inside the ship, and then they were placed here and then pulled out, clamped on the gun as necessary. And again, the barrels would get really super hot. They wouldn't melt down necessarily, but they became compromised, so they would replace them with a barrel from one of these. As you look at the turret, on either side, we've got these windows here and scopes. Those are our optical range finders with a big set of binoculars, basically, going out either side, and they would be able to triangulate the distance to their target, follow it, determine its course and its speed. All that information then is either used to fire the gun here or sent to a central area called plot, where they would plot the firing solution for this and the other guns. But there would be personnel looking through these big binoculars as you get inside the gun. There was also a 4-foot recoil on the barrels. Inside, there was a guy who set the fuse on the projectile, and then had to get down underneath and in a hidey hole because boom, boom, this thing came back. Towing cable, if they had to tow a smaller ship. Took about 100 guys to wrangle this thing. There is motor down below that winds it up. Not many life preservers, life rafts on board. We got some life nets they throw in the water with buoys on them. But for the most part, they didn't expect this thing to sink or have to get 2,300 men off. What you're seeing here sits on a cylinder called a barbette. You can see the top of it here. This thing goes down 4 decks. You're sitting on the cylinder that goes down 4 decks. Down below, they've got the powder. They've got the projectiles stored in separate levels, and they come up chutes or lifts and are put into the gun's barrels from here. 30 men or so work in this area. Total operating this gun, 180 people. If everybody was doing their job, they could fire each barrel every 30 seconds. And like the tip of the iceberg, this is what we see. This is what's going on down below. Powder is kept in these metal canisters. Powder was very volatile. You did not want it to have a lot of change in temperature or moisture. That would compromise the powder, possibly could blow up in your face. So they kept them in the canisters and then sent them up here. But there would be 4 men operating each barrel, 5 because there's a guy also operating the hoist that brings the powder bags up. So you got 15 guys there. There are about 3 forward working on these optical spotters in front of us, for a total of about 30 guys. They had to move this turret, and this goes 180 degrees in 45 seconds. It's a lot of weight to move on ball bearings about yay big. They would move the turret to open up the hatch area, and then with a claw mechanical apparatus, bring the shells down one after another, then move them into whatever position they were going to be stored in. You can see as you come in these tractor seats, 2, 3, 4 of them on behind. These guys are looking through the optical lenses here to help establish the direction and speed of the target. If you take a look through this porthole window, we're going to go from barrel to barrel to barrel, and you'll see the process by which the shell came from down below. It's now coming up the hoist. It's hinged. They would lock that thing. It would slide forward into the back of the gun. Then a rammer, which actually starts here, it's this piston here, would push the shell forward and lock it into the gun. And there would be 4 personnel in here, a gun captain, 2 guys to oversee this, and the rammer, also personnel here. This guy has this handle, and that opens up the tray on which all that powder bags are coming from down below. So step 1 was to get the shell from down below up into the gun pit, as they call it. So the next center barrel here shows the powder bags coming up from down below. He turns the handle and that gate opens. And now they can roll 6 of these bags from that area into behind the gun. Yeah. And then they gently pushed all of that forward so that it was in a configuration like this. 3 powder bags, 90 pounds each, plus the projectile. Push it forward, close the breech. Everybody get out of the way. Boom. And now they could operate the gun here. They could fire it locally, as it's called. They would take in information about the location of their target using this optical rangefinder, the speed of the target, the direction in which the target was moving. You have to account for the ship that you're on, its movement, and the pitch and roll in the waves. So there was a mathematic computation that had to take place, and they did that with this unit right here by Larry. That is a computer. Well, they called it a computer. It's all manual. It's got wheels and cogs in there. And they would enter that information, and then this is like a giant motherboard on your computer. It's routing the information to where it needs to go, but they preferred to do it from inside the ship where it was cleaner, less stress, quieter. And they have a switchboard down there so it could fire all three of these barrels, one of these barrels individually, times 9, they could do them all at once. The switchboard determined who was in control. So before we go below, let's take a look at the 40 millimeter gun. Again, you saw the short range gun, maybe a mile. These are the pom-pom guns you see in all the war movies. Boom, 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 boom. He is operating the elevation by turning that brass handle there. On the other side, the guy trained the gun left and right. You had a crew of 15 to 20 in here. Most of them were ammunition passers. This shot a clip of 4 40 millimeter shells, probably 40 minutes, so about yay around, about that long, and they came in clips of 4. And you can see the weld marks all around here where these things were stored. They dropped them in from up top. And there'd be a gun captain there coordinating the movement. And again, at 4 rounds per clip, bam, 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 they're gone. So you had to keep loading and loading the shells. Here's this optical sight. Cartridges were expended out of these tubes and then would just rattle around inside this nest. It took the manufacturer and creator of this gun weeks, if not months, to finish a mount like this. We purchased the plans, the US did, gave it to the Chrysler Corporation. They created tools and dies so they could create this thing, and they cranked them out in a period of days. Effective range here, 4,000 yards, so it's a medium range gun as opposed to the door knockers we saw. Fired a 40 millimeter shell that came in a clip of 4. Here's the hearing protection that we talked about. Stick your finger in your ear. And then all of these guys are loading shells into the top of the gun. There's the gunner. But anyway, this was a choreographed ballet to get the shells in the gun and fire it. They could fire up to 150 rounds per minute. So they were picking them up and laying them down. The shells, each one about 2 pounds. And there were 15 to 20 guys operating this particular gun. This is called a gun director. And it's got optics here that the officer would look through. This would turn, counterweight, inside mini computer of the day, gyroscopic assistance, and he could turn this much more freely than it obviously does now. It is cabled into this so that as he turns, the gun turns with it. Wherever you see one of these quad mounts, we got one up there, you got these 4 up there, you've got a gun director nearby, this piece of equipment nearby, where you can optically or with radar see where the target is. It computed inside here how far you had to lead that target in order to shell and target to arrive at the same place, and then would fire it using that handle. They had 4 and then eventually 5 different shells. All of them about the same weight, 54 or 55 pounds. One was an illuminating shell that exploded and lit up the ocean surface, so they'd fire that behind or beyond a target so it would illuminate and silhouette the Japanese ship. There was a phosphorescent that just burned everything nearby. That was horrible. And then there was anti-aircraft, a couple of different fuses, and high capacity or comp round that made the crater. So they had 5 different shells, different purposes, all coming out of here. Same idea. You've got a canister of powder coming up from down below. You've got the shell coming up down below, and the crew of 13 are in here operating this gun. And we've got 10 of these mounts alternating between the main deck and the O1 level, as it's called, one level up. And they were young and fearless, as you are at 18, 19 years of age. They also came out of the Depression, so there wasn't a lot of food being consumed during those years. Certainly not a lot of junk food hanging around the house. So they were all skinny to begin with, but if you were about 5'8" to 135 pounds, probably perfect for this. So again, another 5-inch mount there, one here, one up there on the O1 level. 5 on either side, 20 barrels total. And below this is an area called the upper handling. We'll see this. This is what we're looking at on the main deck. Down below, upper handling room, down below the magazine where the powder canisters are kept and the shells are kept. And they're brought up these hoists, these elevators, to the gun house where they're loaded and fired, loaded and fired, loaded and fired. If these guys were doing their job, they could fire probably every 4 seconds.
4 seconds.
Each had a specific job he trained for. The guy who brought the shells up, the shells actually came in upside down. Came upside up, put it in, get your fingers out of the way because they're dropping the gate and firing the gun. Next, boom, boom, boom. And it all depended really on how quickly these folks are doing their jobs. Weight of the shell, 54 pounds. The powder charge was another 15 in a brass casing, which was 13 pounds. And the brass casing, after they fired the gun, the cartridge, the brass casing, was ejected out of the gun. If it was not elevated properly, it would eject and stay inside here. And there was a guy whose job description was hot case man. He, with asbestos gloves, would pick them up and pitch them out another one of these or this one onto the deck. This sits directly under one of those 5-inch turrets up on the O1 level. It's called the upper handling room. Shells would come up one of these scuttles or lifts. There's one over against that wall. So powder and shells would come up from down below. They'd be placed into these vertical things here, which are hoists, like dumbwaiters, and then they would be brought up to the gun house above us, where those 13 men are now operating the gun, loading things up and firing them. You see 4 different types of shells. The blue one with the white star is the illuminating round. 2 of these shells are anti-aircraft. It'll say AA on AAC. Common shell is one that is for shore bombardment. What was interesting about these is the cone there has a timer. It sets the fuse when it comes up upside down. There's a turning that takes place, and that sets a timed fuse like our kitchen timer. Tick, 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 tick. It blows up at a prescribed time, which they figured to be the proper elevation when they're trying to take down planes or put flak in the air. Later in the war, this timed fuse was replaced by something they called the variable timed fuse, sort of a misnomer, VT. It was a proximity fuse, and in the cone was a radio signal, like radar or sonar, that sent the signal out. And when it contacted a target and bounced back to the shell, boom, boom, it then set the timer and it blew up in a prescribed matter of seconds. Japanese fighters could not figure out how our guys got so good all of a sudden, because the majority of planes brought down by the 5-inch guns happened later in the war when they got the variable timed fuse, proximity fuse, that was very hush-hush. This is the executive officer, second most powerful position on the ship. He set the day's agenda, when the training would take place, what exercises were taking place, et cetera, et cetera. Think of him as the city manager. The captain of the ship is the mayor. He ran day-to-day operations. All of that office keeping take place here in the XO's office. Apprentice seaman, you come on board, you don't have a rating yet, you were making $50 a month. Dollar went farther back then, clearly. Now we've got 2,300 guys on board. They got to sleep somewhere. Best solution was to have them sleep near their job assignment so they didn't have to run several hundred yards to get to where they worked. These guys likely worked in the executive officer's staff, although they could have been operated one of the 5-inch guns. All the sailors' uniforms in a locker. Uniform, shoes, hats, a shoe shine kit, shower sandals, all of that was in a locker, subject to inspection. Officer could come along and say, I want to see inside your locker. For that reason, you weren't supposed to keep a diary, for obvious reasons. You're putting down a written record of where the ship is, and you weren't supposed to have booze. So if you had those things, keeping them in your locker, you were really taking a risk. This is one of 8 mess areas where the sailors would eat their meals. See the tables and benches? Those could be lifted up and put into those frames at the ceiling. There's an example of 2 of them stowed away. Get those up off the deck so if we're sliding around in the ocean, these things aren't sliding as well. Dale is looking at the portable chapel that was on board. We had 2 chaplains, first Protestant, then they added a Roman Catholic priest, but 2 chaplains to conduct services, and sadly a burial at sea as necessary. Interesting aspect of the cross, we're looking at the Protestant side of the cross, just the cross itself, that could be turned around, and there's the Christ figure hanging on the other side for Catholic Mass. The organ, portable too, they could move this to another space, conduct services, main deck, or in another mess area like this. As the war wore on and there were more enemy engagements, religious services became a lot better attended. The best smelling area on the ship is here, the bake shop. You got 2,000 enlisted men. Officers had their own meals. 2,000 guys getting 3 square meals a day. That's 6,000 meals coming out of our one galley or kitchen. Among the things they served, baked products, breads, pies for dessert, cakes for special occasions, donuts, rolls, all came out of here. Here's an example of some of the stuff they might prepare here, the cakes, the fancy stuff, the crew showing off their bread. This is where baked bread then would be stored until it was served at the next meal. I believe they did about 1,600 loaves of bread daily in the bake shop. And you see the bags of flour here. They were stored down below, and then junior sailors every day had to bring flours and vegetables and beef up from down below the refrigerated compartment. We had to have 90 days of fresh provisions on board the ship when it left port. And late in the war, the Navy said, oh, let's make that 120 days of fresh provisions. At which point they started running out of space, and instead of the sides of beef, you got cans of Spam. This is Protein Central, the butcher shop. Directly on the other side of that wall or bulkhead is the bake shop that we visited. Okay. So now we're in the butcher shop side. Sailors, their first 90 days on board, junior sailors were often assigned to the commissary. Their job was to go back to the refrigerated areas every day, pick up boxes of beef, sides of beef, which for a while hung on these hooks, and then would be butchered. Sacks of flour and vegetables and all that, and bring them up to a space like this where they would be prepared and then sent through the window to the galley where they'd be cooked and then served to the sailors. We did for a while hang sides of beef here and butcher them, but they found it was hard. I mean, it was really difficult to teach a sailor how to be a butcher, how to know what the flank steak is and where the round is and all that. So they got boxes of beef eventually. It was more efficient. Then as they started running out of space later in the war, you got Spam. Great story about this butcher block table. When the ship arrived in 1961, this table wasn't here. So when we did tours, the space was open. We did have this photo, which showed what the table looked like and what sailors operating in this room looked like. A couple on a tour saw this photo and said, "We have that table at home. It's in our barn."
Oh, no.
Really? And they donated it. So this table was in a barn in, I'm going to say, Massachusetts or Pennsylvania. But anyway, it came out of somebody's barn. They attached the knife holder that you see there, and it now looks just like this table here. Whether it was on the North Carolina or another ship, I can't say, but it was rescued out of somebody's barn. This is where the sailors were served, out of these steam tables. This is the Thanksgiving meal. Here's the menu. It's also a larger version there. On Thanksgiving Day 1942, started with soup, croutons available, all sorts of salads, your main meal with the turkey and all the dressing. Last line of the menu here, cigarettes and cigars. Sailors ate very well, especially compared to Marines who were on an island eating out of their helmet, essentially. These guys sat down at tables. There was coffee all the time, and junior sailors serving them. Had about 30 full-time chefs, and this operated daily, producing 6,000 meals a day, plus midnight rations, mid-rats, for the guys who were operating the ship overnight. Bring them a bucket of sandwiches and a thermos of coffee. But these are the ovens. Fry up some flank steak here. These obviously used for soups and things. Picture of this in operation. You'll also notice the curvature of this wall. That's because that's the big gun right there. And this is part of the operation where the shells and the powder are kept for gun number 3. All of us are old enough to remember Beetle Bailey comic strips. And he was constantly getting KP duty and he had to peel potatoes. You can't do that when you're preparing 6,000 meals. So this is a potato peeler. That is a potato peeler. If you care to put your hand on the inside of this drum, it's very abrasive metal, very sharp, jagged surface to this drum. They would drop potatoes in the top, turn it on, it would spin, the potatoes would be forced to the outside, that abrasive wall would skin the potato peel off, and then they would open the hatch and drop it into one of these buckets. We have all heard the phrase scuttlebutt, meaning gossip. This is a scuttlebutt. It's a 2-part apparatus, the scuttle and the butt. The butt has the liquid, the scuttle are these, and it's a big water fountain. This is where sailors would go to trade gossip. Thus, the scuttlebutt became synonymous with the gossip, and that's the phrase we use today. What's the scuttlebutt? What do you hear? But the original scuttlebutt, dating back to the Royal Navy, a big barrel and whatever, that's what a scuttlebutt actually is. When you came on board, you often didn't have a job assignment yet. They'd issue a job based on their needs. So you didn't have a place to sleep because you sleep near your job assignment. So in the interim, you hung your hammock from these hooks and you slept in a mess room where guys are eating their lunch, dinner, and breakfast until they figured out what they were going to do with you. These illustrate what happened here in the mess rooms, the mess decks. Sailors would eat their meals. They would get their pay. They were paid in cash. The ship had over $1 million of U.S. currency on it at any given time. One of the reasons we had the Marines on board, they guarded the payroll and the money. Guys could sit here, write letters home. When these tables weren't being used, they went up in the racks. Scullery is where they wash dishes. We got 2 of them, one over there, one here. These metal trays were used for enlisted personnel officers ate on actual plates with bowls and silverware. They also paid. I've heard the phrase scullery maid. I never knew what that was all about, but it was a woman who worked in this. Anyway, this was hot and steamy and unpleasant work. These trays, which I always thought started with Swanson TV dinners, invented for the Navy. We call this part of the tour the City at Sea. Very apt name, because you've got all the services that you might find in a small town for the personnel, including a police department. Over there are the quarters for the Master at Arms. Master at Arms and his staff enforced all the basic rules for the enlisted personnel. So that would be petty theft, high stakes gambling, smoking where you're not supposed to be smoking. They enforced those rules and could mete out minor punishment like additional duty. If it were a more important case that went to trial, so to speak, the captain would listen to that in what's called captain's mast. He would listen to the arguments and then determine what the punishment was. That might mean time in the brig behind bars, which isn't on our tour, but it's below us on the third deck. You've got ship's stores, one on either side. Inventory here changed over the years. Here's the cash register so they could see how much they owed. You would buy pen and paper here, shaving kits, playing cards, shoe shine. Guys might get promoted while at sea. Now they need a new patch on their uniform. You had to buy those. They were Navy discounted prices, and any profits from this store went into the ship's recreation fund to buy boxing gloves, whatever the case may be. So ship store number 2 specialized in this. Other side, we'll see tobacco products and candy bars. One of the advantages of a battleship and a ship this large is that you can accommodate an ice cream manufacturing area and serve it here at the soda fountain, or gee-dunk as it's known in the Navy. Here you'll see all the various syrups you need for various ice cream concoctions. Hot fudge, price list there, Pepsi is 5 cents. And guys would come here and spend some of their payroll to get an ice cream treat. Touch of home, help them forget that they're out in the middle of the Pacific, potentially going to be hit by a Japanese attack. The gee-dunk. Ship produced its own ice cream over there, pretty credible product. Sometimes used powdered milk and powdered egg and all that. Sometimes used fresher ingredients, but it was okay. Gussy it up with a little fruit or syrup. Wasn't bad. So that's the gee-dunk. Down below, food storage in the refrigerated areas. Got a map of that here. Down below is ice making, ice for drinks, ice for various things. They created the ice here. And then there are storage rooms for various fruits and vegetables, meat, butters and eggs, and temperature controlled, 15 degrees. We're now on the port side. Talked about ship's morale, keeping the crew happy. The post office was hugely important. Guys lived to get mail from home. How they find them in the Pacific, hard to figure. But letters would come. There's a picture there of a mail sack being delivered from a destroyer. When sailors wrote letters, they didn't seal them in an envelope and mail them. Those letters in their raw form were read by the officer corps, and then they would black out sensitive information that wasn't supposed to be communicated. Your ship's position, planned bombardments, anything that could be devastating to the fleet if it fell into the wrong hands was censored out before they mailed it home. The phrase loose lips sink ships Good example right there. But look at this guy, big grin on his face reading his letter. Quick look at another store. All of the candy products that we still have today sold there. Snickers, Milky Way, Mounds bars, Tootsie Roll Pops, Barbasol, Roytan, your cigarette products. So, popular place to come spend your money. Over the course of the war, there were about 7,000 men who served on the ship. You didn't stay on all 5 years or 4 years of your enlistment. You came and you went, you got assigned to different duties. So we had 7,000 men who served on the ship. Their names are listed here. Post-war, some of the enlisted men post-war in here. There was a company or a detachment of Marines, 86 at a time. Their names listed here. They were in charge of protection of the captain, protection of the ship. They were the only personnel on board who had sidearms, carry a rifle, carry a pistol. Sailors didn't. Interestingly, in the 6 years in which this ship was commissioned, we had 9 commanding officers, 9 captains. And in some cases, like this fellow here and this fellow here, their captaincy lasted 6 months, January to June. The reason is this was a plum assignment. If you were a captain of a battleship and you operated that ship properly and you didn't run into sandbars and you didn't wreck another ship and you fought valiantly, then they wanted to promote you to admiral. And the second these guys stepped off the ship, they were promoted to admiral. We saw through plexiglass one of the upper handling rooms for the 5-inch guns. You can actually step in here if you like, take a look at the 5 different shells that would have been fired. Again, they came up from down below, canisters of powder over there against that bulkhead. And then they were placed at the center of the room in these hoists and went up to the gun house where that crew of 13 then would combine powder and shell and fire. There are 4 hoists in here, 2 for powder, 2 for shells. That apparatus actually turns with the gun house above us so that it's always in line with the back of the barrel. This is a spare engine for the Kingfisher plane, 450 horsepower Pratt & Whitney engine. We saw the upper handling room where the 5-inch shells are located. Here's a powder canister coming up from down below. Here's one of the 5-inch shells. AAC, anti-aircraft, composition A, that's to blow a crater. There is this sort of mechanism all over the ship, because again, we've got 10 mounts, 20 barrels, and these feed 1 barrel. So they're everywhere. As I mentioned, you had to keep the powder at a stable temperature. This is the guts of the air conditioning or cooling, Freon used mostly, and kept the temperature down in powder to about 85 degrees. That was cool. Now you're generating electricity down here, and then these panels, switchboards, would route that electricity to other parts of the ship and regulate who was getting what. So you're in engine room number 4. There are 4 engine rooms on board. Each has twin boilers, which are here and here. This ship burned fuel oil. Earlier ships burned coal. The burning was in order to heat up water, turn it to steam, and use that on turbines to create mechanical energy. Even nuclear-powered submarines are creating steam. They do it with nuclear power. This ship used fuel oil. It has a capacity to hold 2 million gallons of this. This is called Bunker C fuel oil. It's a molasses-like consistency. It had to be heated in these pipes before they threw it into the boiler. Then it would hit the boiler room wall, explode into a high-temperature fire, which heated the water that are in pipes that run throughout this area, turn that into a high-temperature, high-pressure steam, and that's routed to the turbines, which we'll see in a second. All 4 boiler rooms have a little different footprint, but they're all basically the same concept. You're burning fuel oil, creating steam, using that steam to power the ship. Part of your training was to know what was what down here. All pipes have a designation: 2 black stripes, 4 green stripes. This is for our benefit to know that 4 green is fresh water. 2 black would be exhaust steam. You've got gasoline, you've got all sorts of other pipes here, and to touch, you might be able to identify what this was. So the boilers here, boilers 7 and 8, correspond to this boiler room. 850 degrees was the superheated steam. Turbine entered the high pressure turbine at 585 pounds per square inch. And that steam then would go over the blades, get the mechanical energy working, and that would eventually be processed and head down to the propellers. The low pressure turbine could turn at 4,900 RPM, way too high to turn a 16-foot propeller. I mean, if it was going 4,900 RPM, it would blow the back of the ship off. So they sent it through a reduction gear built by General Electric, and like the gearbox in your car, it changed the ratio of all that motion to slow things down. So if you wanted to go single-digit speed, you might go 6 revolutions per minute of the big propeller. If you wanted to go faster, it might be 20 or so. And that was all determined by how this steam was sent through the turbines in order to power the ship. And when we get to the bridge, the guys who were operating, as the helmsman's wheel and all that, this thing doesn't turn on a dime, and it doesn't stop on a dime. So you radio down here to go to flank speed to stop motion. You've still got momentum going for some distance before this thing stops.
Is this system also for the drinking water? Or is that separate?
No, that is separate. This is electricity. You can see the blades of the turbine in there. And the crew on this side would be working with the crew over there to maximize their efforts. This is the main control panel. Crew here would get instructions from the bridge. The bridge we'll see has what's called the engine order telegraph. It's the thing that you see in the movies. The guy pushes the handle forward to reset it, then click, 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 says how much we want coming out of here. Full speed, emergency, full speed, flank speed, etc. So there would be a bell ringing, and then they would see this move. They, in turn, communicated to the bridge that, yes, that's what we're going to do. And then, working with the guys burning the fuel oil and creating the steam, they would make sure there wasn't a lot of waste at either end, and they could close and open these valves to send the steam through the turbines to turn the wheels, turn the propellers that are aft of here. They would look at all of these gauges. Red is your target, white is where you are. They were trying to get these things to line up and perform the orders that they got from the bridge. Directly below you, this is a propeller shaft, and it continues to the back of the ship where it now is going to work one of the propellers. This is the reduction gear, General Electric stamped logo on it. 5,900 RPM for high pressure, 4,900 RPM for low pressure. They would reduce that to 6 RPMs for a 1 knot speed, and 199 for top speed of 28 knots. When we were up topside underneath the turret number 3, we had a big hatch where I said they lowered the shells. That's this wishing well. That's what this is all about. Shells would come down from up above on that hatch. They'd be fixed in this claw arrangement with a big giant motor. it would take them from up there down to there. That's 4 decks down there, and this is why we call it the wishing well. People throw coins in. This is another mess area where sailors would eat. But here's the projector room, and there's the movie screen, and they would lower the screen at night, and on a regular basis they would show films. They liked musical comedies, they liked musicals, pretty girls diving into the swimming pool and all of that. They did not want to watch John Wayne win the war. I'm doing that already. I don't need to see a war movie. I want Abbott and Costello. This is a berthing area, large bedroom for about 80 sailors. You can see there are 1, 2, 3, 4 over here, 5 bunks or racks, floor to ceiling. If you were in the top rack, you stepped on everybody below you to get up to your rack. Good way to make friends. It was hot in here. Every morning they had to wrap their mattress in a fireproof bag because obviously it was flammable and they didn't want fire. So they had a fireproof bag, and then they would strap it in so these things could be closed and allow more access. This is the kind of room you had between the guy above you. Guy sweated profusely down here. They're 19-year-old boys. It's 100 some odd degrees. These mattresses, which are 2.5 inches thick maybe, never dried out. They'd take them out on the main deck when they could, and they'd hang them over the lifelines, that rope there. But you're in a tropical environment. Maybe they dried out, maybe they didn't. So we'll move forward now into the lovely, spacious head. There were 6 of the enlisted heads on this deck. Couple hundred sailors would use this in any given day. I liken this to boys' gym class on steroids. You surrendered all modesty when you were in the Navy, when you came in here to take a shower or do your business in these stalls. Do you see doors on those stalls? No. They distilled enough fresh water for the engine rooms, for food prep. Personal hygiene came last on the list. To that end, you took the shortest possible shower you could take. Guys still talk about and still take Navy showers. Turn on the water just enough to get wet. Turn it off. Lather up with the soap. Turn it on again. Rinse yourself off. Turn it off. You're out the door. Senior enlisted personnel can rise to the rank of Chief Petty Officer. There were 69 of them on the ship during the war. These guys were the old salts, if you will. They knew their area of expertise on the ship forward and backward to the degree that a junior officer who just came out of Annapolis and was assigned to the ship, and they said, "You're in charge of X," would inevitably have to contact one of these chiefs and go, "I don't know anything about X." And then the chief would put out his cigar and go, "Come here, I'll show you." So these guys are like the shop foreman, as Bull Halsey said. Battleships are carried to sea on the backs of the CPOs. Very important ranking and job description. Pictures of some of the guys here on the North Carolina, Chief Petty Officers. The Navy at one point determined that blue was the best color for the interior lighting of a ship, so that when you stepped outside at night, your eyes would adjust to the night light more quickly because you've been looking at blue light. Subsequent testing realized it was red, so that's why you get red lights inside a socket that has been stamped blue. Rather than replace the socket, they just put the red light in. Fire suppression hoses everywhere. Worst thing that can happen on a ship, fire. Every sailor is trained in firefighting. They say that every Marine is a rifleman because they're all taught to fire a rifle, even if they're a clerk. Every sailor is a fireman. And we'll go down to the machine shop now. Has a very distinctive aroma. Machine oil.
Yep.
Again, much like the ice cream manufacturing and whatnot, this ship, being a battleship, is large enough to accommodate a machine shop of this size. Look at the weight of the lathe that we have here, the various drill presses and whatnot. They could manufacture tools and dies to repair parts of this ship and smaller ships that don't have the capability of a machine shop. Schematics were kept in that office space back there. And then if somebody said, we broke a valve that we need for the engine room, bring it down, they'd repair it right here. Now this area, which again is protected by that armored citadel, the armored bond, this is called plot. This is where they would plot the firing solution for the big guns. There's a space next door, which is for the 5-inch guns. So around the ship at the higher elevations are things called battery directors, spot 1, spot 2, spot 3. 5-inch guns have things called Sky 1, 2, 3, and 4. This has personnel in it. It's got radar in them, and they are taking in all the information about where your target is. Things like you need to know the speed and direction of your ship, the roll and pitch of the ship, the weight of the projectile, any wind blowing out there, what's our target doing. All that information gets fed to this space and is entered manually, click, 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 into these computers. And the computer spits out a firing solution. We're going to fire the main battery at this elevation and train it to the right so many degrees. And then they fire the gun from either one of these towers or down here. The picture here indicates there was a helmsman's wheel down here. Here's the compass, engine order telegraph telling the engine room what you want them to do. This is one of these spaces that you can operate the ship, and there is a key here, a switchboard kind of thing, click, 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 that puts some area of the ship under control. Click 1 for here, click 2 for aft steering, et cetera, et cetera. We've talked about damage control and the guys who put out fires and flood apartments intentionally. Headquarters for damage control right there. They've got all the schematics of the ship. So here's the master switch. This determines who's in charge. You can see at the top, pilot house, conning tower, secondary conning station, et cetera, et cetera. Turn that, all of this moves, and then you're in charge. This is one of the radio rooms. This is where sailors would sit at these typewriters, headphones on. They're listening to Morse code being sent from Honolulu, headquarters of the U.S. Navy. These bips and bips would be coming across in code. They would type out what they're hearing, not knowing what they're actually typing. And then that information would be decoded and routed to various parts of the ship that needed that information. We all did this with drive-up banking. You pull up, you put your deposit in here, close it, poof, off it goes. This taking this information to the conning tower, flag office, bridge, flag, et cetera, et cetera. The pneumatic tubes. You might send somebody running up to the conning tower with it in hand. Depends on how urgent it is, but these tubes were used for that purpose. So this is the conning tower, flag office, which is the office where the admiral's staff would be working if we had an admiral on board. The bridge, flag, radio, again, the radio room for the admiral, and Combat Information Center, or CIC. In the back of this room is a canvas bag, the burn bag. All this paper would eventually be incinerated. This is for the 5-inch guns. And there are 4 areas of the ship elevated that do the range finding for the 5-inch guns. Each one reports to 1, 2, 3, 4 of these computers. from sky 1, 2, 3, and 4. That information's coming in here. Guys with headphones talking to the personnel in those towers. Wind speed, direction of your target, all those important factors. Sending it here, entering it into the computer. Look at the cabling that took place in here. And this picture really gives you an idea of what it was like in this room. All of these guys with these headphones and microphones dangling on their chest, talking to other parts of the ship, taking that information, entering it in the computer. So we're now going to go through a doorway that didn't exist initially. This was all a wall. Look how thick it is, though. The idea, we don't want any bad things happening there to spread here. This is called projectile flats. It was the home of the projectiles. We got 120 or so against the perimeter here. They would have to be moved to this center ring here in order to be placed in a lift or hoist and then sent up to the turret above us. And they would move these shells by wrapping a rope around this spinning capstan and this shell, and then pull it into the center ring where it could now be maneuvered to go up to the hoist. Different types of shells here. The black ones are those armor-piercing shells with the green die pack. Green are the high-capacity create a crater shell. And this sort of arrangement is happening underneath each one of the 3 main battery guns. That shows you the process by which they might move a shell around. That capstan is spinning, help move the shell. We are inside the barbette for turret 2. And if you look at the profile of the ship, you'll see that turret 2 sits above turret 1. So it doesn't blow turret 1 to smithereens when it fires its guns. It's a little higher. Because it's higher, we have this extra level here called the mezzanine. There are 121 of these blue practice shells around the outside of the mezzanine level. Down below, and we're going to go here next, this is where the powder moved from the magazines, which are outside of this circle, came through these ports here, these scuttles, close the handle, open the handle, close the handle to bring the powder bags in, place them into these trays, and then up they would go to the turret above us. Personnel who worked in here were responsible for getting the powder bags into these trays, the hoist that would send them up. They worked closely with personnel behind me, behind this wall, where the powder was stored in the magazines. They'd communicate to the crew on the other side with these dials, telling them to pass the powder, or stand by, or secure. If they said pass the powder, one would come here, they would open up the crank, take this, put it here, close it, and do that for every powder bag that came through, because they don't, again, want accidental explosions going from here to here and to the magazine where all that stuff is stored. Got 3 barrels above us. That meant you had 3 personnel in here. This was the workspace that this guy occupied to send powder up to the gun above us. So you have personnel in here helping to pass, like the Fireman's Bucket Brigade, powder from the magazine into powder handling. But these were actually the canisters that protected the powder bags, 3 per canister. They kept them sealed so they would not be subject to changes in environment, element, temperature, humidity. As needed then, they would open them up, place the bag on a conveyor like this, and send it through that safety zone and then into powder handling. This room, because that's a circle in there, this room really extends all the way around. So this ship is large enough now to have an operating room and to treat our sailors for injuries and other ships that don't have the size and scope of our hospital. So patients would be put in that basket and then would be pulleyed across from their ship to the North Carolina, the sea underneath them, and then they would be brought on board for medical treatments. This was kind of the triage unit, the first place they saw. As we go forward, you'll see the operating room like MASH. So this is where they would have spent the night or nights in hospital. Not unusual for somebody to kind of fake their way in, or at least try to. Yeah, doctor said I was supposed to spend the night in here. This is the supply officer's stateroom.
Oh, boy.
Single bed, wardrobe for hanger clothes, desk. When he's on your ship and you're flying his flag, you're on the flagship. This space here is our memorial. Around the perimeter of the room are the names of the nearly 11,000 North Carolinians who died in all branches of the service during the war. Army, Navy, Air Corps, Marine Corps, Coast Guard, Merchant Marine. As you know, there are 100 counties in the state. They are listed here by county, and every county is represented. It is not unusual for someone to come here and identify a name, to be looking for their uncle and see the name. The 10 sailors who died in action on the ship are memorialized here on this plaque. 5 to torpedo, 3 to friendly fire, 1 to an aviation accident, and 1 to a strafing Japanese fighter who riddled the deck with shells, and it found one of our gunners. So the ship is a museum and a memorial, and that's our mission, to keep the memory alive. And this is our way of remembering those who died.